Rubin. The Wikipedia page actually presents Gail Rubin's views on pedophilia very neutrally, simply saying that she discussed those topics, essentially. But if you do a quick Google search, it's not hard to confirm what Derek Jensen is saying in this video. Here's an article from Newsmax that was published in 2004. U.S. Santa Cruz professor Gail Rubin calls the government's crackdown on child molesters a savage and undeserved witch hunt. Intolerance of pedophilia, she claims, has more in common with ideologies of racism than with true ethics. Rubin advances these opinions in the first essay of the Lesbian and Gay Studies Reader, where she writes, "Boy lovers are so stigmatized that it is difficult to find defenders for their civil liberties, let alone erotic orientation. Consequently, the police have feasted on them. Local police, the FBI, and watchdog postal inspectors have joined to build a huge apparatus whose sole aim is to wipe out the community of men who love underage youth." And what the Wikipedia page does do is have a nice list of her honors and awards. So that's cool.
Bill gave a lot of funding to ICE, and they are taking advantage here. ICE declares millions of undocumented immigrants ineligible for bond hearings. A memo from the agency's acting director instructs officers to hold immigrants who entered the country illegally for the duration of their removal proceedings, which can take months or even years. The Trump administration has declared that immigrants who arrived in the United States illegally are no longer eligible for a bond hearing as they fight deportation proceedings in court, according to documents reviewed by the Washington Post. In a July 8th memo, Todd M. Lyons, acting director of ICE, told officers that such immigrants should be detained for the duration of their removal proceedings, which can take months or years. Lawyers say the policy will apply to millions of immigrants who crossed the U.S.-Mexico border over the past few decades, including under the Biden administration. In the past, immigrants residing in the U.S. interior generally have been allowed to request a bond hearing before an immigration judge. But Lyons wrote that the Trump administration's Departments of Homeland Security and Justice had revisited its legal position on detention and release authorities and determined that such immigrants may not be released from ICE custody. In rare exceptions, immigrants may be released on parole, but that decision will be up to an immigration officer, not a judge, he wrote. So in case you're confused, what's the difference between an immigration officer and a judge? Here is Ron DeSantis clearing that up in advance of the Alligator Alcatraz opening.
Immigration judge. These are not Article 3. This idea of immigration judge, these are not Article 3 judges. They're not federal judges like we think of. These are executive branch employees who are called immigration judges. So you can have pretty much, you can deputize different employees to do that. So we've offered some of our National Guardsmen to be able to serve as immigration judges. So what you could have is, okay, someone's a criminal alien, they obviously fast track. Someone has an order of deportation, okay, fast track. Someone may have just gotten picked up. They come, they can get like a notice to appear. Biden would tell you to come in 2 years. I mean, under the Trump administration, it's usually within, 14 to 30 days. But we can have our National Guard acting as immigration judges right on site. So you go, maybe you have a day or two, whatever, and then a decision's made, and then that's it. So this is potentially be a force multiplier.
Okay, so a lot of these immigration officials or immigration judges are not judicial branch judges the way we think. That's what Ron DeSantis says here. And he also says there, speaking of the Alligator Alcatraz jail, that there are different distinctions between certain people who are held there, including criminals, which he said, but also people who have removal orders and people who are just picked up. So this idea that they are distinguishing between violent criminals and only going after the worst of the worst and locking them up indefinitely in these ICE centers is wrong by their own admission. I mean, you just heard it right there from his mouth. So what you could have here are people who are detained, not charged with a crime, and held for God knows how long until they figure out where to put them. Now, hopefully, and I just say this hopefully just out of mercy for the people who end up in this situation, hopefully with all this investment, they'll figure this out quickly and get people moving quickly, because they're saying they hope to have capacity for 100,000 per day. So if they're trying to deport tens of millions, then you hope that they just don't have room to keep people for years. But they reserve that right. And certainly there are going to be some horror stories that result from this. The pattern here, folks, is that the immigration issue is being used as a pretext to build a police state. That's really what this is about. The sweeping new detention policy comes days after Congress passed the spending package that will allocate $45 billion over the next 4 years to lock up immigrants for civil deportation proceedings. The measure will allow ICE to roughly double the nation's immigrant detention capacity to 100,000 people a day. Since the memos were issued last week, the American Immigration Lawyers Association said members had reported that immigrants were being denied bond hearings in more than a dozen immigration courts across the United States, including in New York, Virginia, Oregon, North Carolina, Ohio, and Georgia. The Department of Justice oversees the immigration court. So this is not up to the states. It doesn't matter. Red state, blue state, doesn't matter, right? This is their way of putting in place nationwide a method of detaining even more people, said Greg Chen, Senior Director of Government Relations for the American Immigration Lawyers Association. It's requiring the detention of far more people without any real review of their individual circumstances. ICE said in a statement that the new policy, quote, closes a loophole in the nation's immigration laws and ensures that everyone who entered the United States without permission is treated equally. Okay, well, people should be treated equally in the sense that they all have equal rights under the law. But according to you guys, you weren't going to treat every case equally. What this says is we are applying a blanket approach to every case. I thought first you're targeting violent criminals. It makes sense that you have to detain violent criminals. They come into the country and they are committing violent crimes, and you have to keep them detained so they don't continue to commit violent crimes. That makes sense. But if someone is here on a civil immigration offense, do they have to be locked in a cage indefinitely? What if they're not charged with any crime? Isn't the whole point that you're supposed to distinguish between the worst of the worst and everyone else? I thought that was supposed to be